The family dog actually inherited part of their father's estate. Yet, as the eldest son, he didn't receive a single cent. All the wealth and titles went to his younger brother. The man couldn't understand how he ended up in such a situation. He caused a huge scene at the will reading and stormed out in anger. Even Edward was completely stunned. He had never planned to fight his brother for the inheritance, but the will was legally binding and couldn't be changed. He could only ask his brother to pay off the 70 million debt for him. Edward was dumbfounded on the spot, because the titles were practically worthless, especially since by their father's generation, the family had already declined. They might have to sell the family estate at a loss just to cover the debt. The older brother was well aware, but the gangs collecting the debt would stop at nothing. Sooner or later, the family would get hurt. To protect their innocent mother and sister, Edward had no choice. He had to start inventorying the family's remaining assets. What no one expected was that despite his father's business failure, the safe still held a surprising amount of money. After counting the money, they found exactly 10 million. Unfortunately, it was still far from the 70 million needed. He had to contact the financial advisor for help. Normally, this amount wouldn't mean much, but the gang gave only 3 days to repay the debt. To raise cash quickly, they would likely have to sell the estate. The advisor started looking for buyers. Thinking of the ancestral property being lost in his hands, Edward couldn't help but feel sorrow. But then a woman appeared and changed the course of his life. The woman used to be his father's business partner. Now that the Duke had passed away, Edward had inherited the title, so he had to learn about his father's businesses. They drove to the family estate. This dairy farm alone generated 50 million a year. Edward was stunned. Those cows couldn't possibly be worth that much. Susie turned and opened a shipping container. There was something hidden inside. She lifted the wooden floor, revealing a brightly lit chamber beneath. He stepped into the passage and was completely speechless. Beneath the estate was a massive botanical garden. The Duke had leased the land to her for cultivating those plants. All Susie had to do was pay rent yearly plus a small percentage of profits. The former Duke had never been greedy, so the arrangement always ran smoothly. She introduced Edward to a plant specialist. They had lived under the estate for many years, yet this was their first meeting. He politely greeted the new Duke. Edward was shocked at how valuable his estate truly was. Based on his father's share, the annual revenue must be around 500 million. And the estate might just be the tip of a much bigger operation. Susie hoped he could be like his father and not meddle too much in the business, but instead keep his curiosity in check and simply collect rent every year. But Edward's problems were more immediate. He needed to sell the estate to come up with 70 million in 3 days. To avoid disrupting the business, Susie decided to help her new landlord and solve the crisis. Upon learning that Edward's brother's debt included interest unfairly added by the gang, she decided to use her connections to remove that excess. She went to the local fish stall, which the gang used as a front. She walked straight up to the owner and stated her name, but he had never heard of her until she mentioned her father's name, which instantly earned his respect. They went upstairs for a private talk.